Welcome to Roman Toilet Time, everybody. Let me say, I wish we were here together. It's an awful lot more fun to enjoy the refreshments and get to speak about this most important aspect of Roman society, and let's be honest, our society as well. Joining us today, of course, is Cecil, the official Roman toilet mascot of Flaming Rat. So, let's start right off. This is a public toilet from 200 AD. Now, what's cool is you can definitely see there's some similarities to bathrooms that we have today. For example, we've got the little hole and we've got the little groove, I suppose. So if you were going to stand up and use the bathroom, you could do it that way. Although I think that it's more likely that the holes in the front have a different purpose, which we will get to. So when we look at this, you'll notice there's a trough running along the bottom of the picture here. It runs all the way around about maybe a foot from where the actual toilets are, and it had water running through it for people to rinse their sponge on a stick with, and we'll get into that a little bit more here shortly. But not a terrible place, nice high ceilings. One of the things that I'm sure you're going to notice is there's no stalls, and so yeah. Men and women did, in fact, use the public toilets of Rome side by side, cheek to cheek, so to speak. And it was certainly an intimate affair because there was no privacy. We'll see a couple pictures here shortly with some artist renditions of what it might be, but definitely not something we would be terribly comfortable with now. The sewers weren't really for poop, even though the public toilets were hooked into the major sewage system of Rome itself. What the sewers were actually used for was water. When it would rain, water would collect in the streets, and it would flow down into the Cloaca Maxima, which was the largest of the sewer tunnels. It was a huge tunnel that then ran out into the Tiber River. And it was actually used for when the Tiber flooded as well. So it's pretty cool. You can see it's fairly tall. I would say it's probably, you see the guy towards the back there. He might be a 6-foot ceiling, maybe. And then you've got the trough on the bottom. I would think that when the water was really, really going, it would have gone up over the actual sidewalk piece itself. Here's another cool picture of it. Definitely a very, very neat place. When I imagine a sewer, this is certainly the kind of thing that I would picture. It's got a nice arch, and it would have used cut stones with most likely concrete, because we talked about that. The Romans knew the secret of concrete, and it was a secret that actually wasn't really rediscovered in the modern era until about the 1700s, 1800s, I think. This one here has standing water down on the bottom of the sewer tunnel, but pretty neat looking, I think, of course. Would it have smelled? That's often the question one of you probably would have asked at this point. Probably not. You got to remember, modern sewers fill up pretty quickly with some pretty gross stuff. But even though the city of Rome had about 1 million people, it isn't as though they were all using the sewer in the same way that we might use sewage systems in our time today. So you wouldn't want to drink it, you wouldn't want to swim in it for sure, but it probably wouldn't have been as nasty and dirty as the water we might find in some of our places. Although I could be wrong, because if you think about it, the water is going to wash through the streets, and it would have cleaned any animal dung or refuse that was in the streets. So hard to say. We can't do anything but hypothesize what the sewer system was like then. I believe parts of it are somewhat used today, but that's hard to say. It could still be connected to some drains and portions of the city, but I would think they would try to protect it to a degree. So what were the dangers of using the bathroom? Because like I told you, if you were to have a time machine and you could go back anywhere in history, probably one of the most exciting places to go would be a Roman public toilet during the empire. Let's say during the 5 good emperors. So what, 96 AD to around 200 AD? Somewhere in there, maybe during Marcus Aurelius's reign, going back with our time machine to check out these public bathrooms. It's the second most exciting thing I can think of. The first one, of course, being, again, my 7th birthday. Seriously, everyone who went there said it was the greatest birthday that they'd ever seen. So if you have 2 trips on a time machine, the second trip should go to ancient Rome to use a public toilet. But your first trip should, of course, be my 7th birthday. For those of you who needed to know, that would be 1984. Anyway, the real dangers of using the toilets was the sewer system itself. We have enough evidence to know that there were times when there would be a backup of sewer gases, and those sewer gases would ignite. And so we have evidence that there were explosions of sorts that would sometimes occur. Gouts of fire blasting up out of the holes. That's a pretty exciting thing. And you probably wouldn't want to actually be using the toilet when such a thing occurred. Now, I know some of you, I could think of you. I won't say your names right now because that wouldn't be fair to you, but I know some of you would say, would it be powerful enough to fire you into the air off the toilet itself? The answer to that, probably not. I think the more likely thing would be horrific damage and agony, because I want to remind you, they didn't have a very good medical system back then, compared to us. In particular, burn injuries would have been very hard to treat, and even today, burn injuries are not easy. So other dangers, of course, animals. Now I know this is going to creep some of you out. I know students and people who get nervous when they have to use a bathroom. They sometimes think that animals might come up out of the sewer system. We have a lot of myths about that, but it was an actual thing that we have some evidence of from ancient Rome. Animals would nest in the tunnels, and you got to remember these sewer tunnels are a lot different. The chambers, the clay pipes that go from these sewers down the toilet itself down into the sewer, they weren't really they weren't full of water. So it wasn't as though it had to be an aquatic animal able to survive that, but you could certainly imagine hives of insects, rats for sure, used to make their nests down there. Maybe a raccoon. I don't know. Do they have raccoons in Rome? Could be. I didn't do any research on that one, so don't quote me on that. But I know they had rats. So rat attacks. So let's say you're there sitting on the toilet doing your thing, and you upset either a hive of bees or maybe a rat angry. I like to go back to Cecil. Imagine the terror of a flaming explosion that ignites the rats on fire, and they flee trying to escape, and you're there burning, injured, and attacked by flaming rats and rodents, and the hornets get involved. It's pretty exciting. Let's be clear. But we do know the Romans did definitely have this problem. On the walls of Pompeii, we have graffiti, for example, that says, "Beware the dangers while pooping." Yes, that's a real thing. And it's important for me to ask you right now, is that a primary or secondary source? Unfortunately, we didn't get a lot of opportunity to discuss that, but we have talked about primary and secondary sources. As a reminder, a primary source is something from a person who was there. Okay, so they're talking about something they themselves witnessed. A secondary source, on the other hand, is something written down by a person who has been told about or has read about a specific event. So, the graffiti written on the wall outside the bathroom, is that a primary or a secondary source? I want you to think about that, and I'll talk about it when we get to the end of the video. Here's some good images of some more toilets. Over here on the left-hand side of the screen, you see something similar to the one that we saw at the beginning. This looks like a much more, it's not quite as impressive. It doesn't have those really high ceilings, and it definitely seems like you're higher up. I don't know. Feet would dangle if you were sitting on that potentially. But we've got the big trough of water running down the middle, and we've got, I would think there would be a wooden structure, of course, that would be up over that. This wouldn't be something where you're out in the open and exposed to the sun. There would have been a wooden framework of some sort. Over here on the right-hand side, we see 3 Romans taking care of their business. And what you'll notice is here the trough is actually full of water. At the back of the room, there's a little fountain where the water is running out of. And then there's enough of an incline going all the way around the room that the water takes itself out the wall on the back side as well. There were 2 basins in this room. One has clean water. The other one in the front here has water in it, and it's got those 2 little grooves. And this is where things get kind of gross, but potentially useful. That's actually where you would put your sponge on a stick. You'll see that they're all holding little sticks, and there would be a sponge wrapped around it. So yeah, we use toilet paper, and we are in the middle of our TP apocalypse here. But the Romans didn't have access to toilet paper. Toilet paper as we know it, wasn't really invented until I think 1920s or so, and even then it wasn't super soft. It kind of had like splinters and stuff in it, so it wasn't a very comfortable experience to use it. The Romans, on the other hand, had sponges, which are natural sea creatures, which they would tie to a stick. And then you would dip it in the water to clean it off, because they were public sponges. Gross. And then they would, of course, wipe themselves, and then they would rinse it again in the little trough that's down on the ground there. That's actually what the trough is for. And then you would put it back in the basin. So not very cleanly, pretty darn gross, which is part of the reason why people avoided public toilets. You'd have your own sponge at home, and probably like a toothbrush, everyone would have their own sponge, and they would wash that off themselves. Personal toilets is something we should probably talk about. This is a reconstruction of what we believe a personal toilet would have looked like. It would have been in an alcove, usually in the kitchen. And so, because it was near water. You'd have a similar structure to what you would see in the public toilet. You have a little place where you'd sit down. And after you did your business, you'd get an urn full of water, and you would dump it down into the little hole at the bottom of the seat. And it would wash down into either a sewer system, but actually most people did not want to connect their home toilet to the sewer system. Instead, it would go either out directly into the street, gross, or it would go into a personal cesspit, which would be a little hole or a little compartment in the building that they lived in, and slaves would come around and open it up and shovel all of the poop out every so often. Kind of like a septic system that you might have if you live in the countryside, where you have to have your own septic system because you can't hook into the city sewer, Skowhegan sewer system. So it was definitely safer, Public toilets were dark, scary, and sometimes explodey. So being able to hold it until you got home was something most Romans tried to do, as far as we're aware. Because there were other dangers as well. Not only could you potentially get hurt by sewer gas or an animal attack, but let's be honest, those were very rare. I can't imagine too many opportunities for that to happen. But they happened often enough that people commented on it. The more significant thing was actually being robbed. I want you to think about it. You're in there. It's dark. There's no light. There's no natural light in there, so it's really whatever light's coming in from the street or any windows. So the later into the day you go, the darker it is in those bathrooms. And somebody comes in and pretends to use the bathroom across from you while you're in a compromised position. Next thing you know, boom! The guy's trying to rob you. It happened. It happened enough that they wrote this stuff down. So it's pretty scary. So you might get attacked by animals, blown up, and robbed in the same day. The horror. This is an actual primary source. Drawing, I believe this one is from Pompeii, of ruffians playing dice. This would have been painted into a wall. Okay, here's a nice close-up picture of the legendary sponge on a stick. If you give me enough requests and the toilet paper apocalypse gets bad enough, I would be more than happy to show you how to make a sponge on a stick. As a matter of fact, I've already begun work on such a video just in case for my loved ones. You can see it literally is a natural sponge with a stick jammed into it, and then they used twine to tie it off so it didn't fall out. Because honestly, if you kind of dipped it down into the hole in the front of the toilet, which is most likely what they were for, you don't want that sponge to fall off and then disappear down into the sewer tunnels. So that would be very disappointing. So what about baths? Now, the Roman toilets is something great to talk about, but the Roman baths are actually one of those things that people speak about very, very often. Roman baths were one of the most important things to a Roman. Your average Roman, even poor Romans, had access to the public baths, and it was considered a very important, essential piece of Roman culture. This image here on the left, I believe, is from the Roman baths in London. This is an outside pool. This would have been one of the cooler pools because they basically had three kinds of pools to bathe in. All of them were public, so you would go into them with others. In our Colosseum video that we watched, we saw parts of the baths where we saw that was where the gladiators were getting massages, they were bathing, they were rubbing themselves with the olive oil leaves because the Romans felt that this was essential. You kept yourself clean. Even slaves and poor people were expected to do this. The three kinds of baths would have been warm, hot, warm, and cold. So the hot baths would have been warmed from beneath by fires. There's various ways that we think that it happened. There would have been potentially clay pipes that would have carried water that was heated in other areas, basically like some of the way that we do heating in houses today. And it would have kept the water nice and warm, hot. Really. Warm baths were generally similar to that. They were quite warm as well, but not as hot as the hot ones. And then you had the cold ones, which were generally room temperature. So they call them cold baths because, as you know, if you let water sit, it actually gets cold pretty quickly. And so the cold baths were included as well. All of these were seen as healthy. I know when I was in college, I took a class, and my professor, who was not a specialist in Roman culture, thought, ooh, how gross these baths must have been, all these people getting in and out of them, with no way to really keep them clean. We actually do think that they had ways to keep them clean. They would have had ways to filter the water in the way that we naturally filter water, by allowing the water to progress through pipes. They would go through sand, gravel, then sand and silt, and as the particles got progressively more dense, more of the dirt would be filtered out of the water. So they wouldn't just have these gross pools of water sitting around. And so it was a very important thing. There were masseuses to give massages. There was a gymnasium area. There was an open air portion where people could exercise. And athletes and gladiators were encouraged to exercise. And one of the gross things that they actually did was they would do this stuff and they would get covered in dust, and they would actually rub themselves with olive oil beforehand because they thought that would limber up their muscles. And what they would then do is they would use these scraping spoons to scrape the mud off that accumulated. So it's a little bit of like sweat and the olive oil on the skin and any dirt that they collected. They would then scrape that stuff off and they would actually sell it. So if you had muscle pain, you could actually buy a little container of Gladiator sweat and olive oil and dust, and you'd rub it on there like a lotion because they thought that the strength of the gladiator would help their muscles. Or an athlete, you could get it from an athlete as well, a non-gladiatorial athlete. So that doesn't really shake out when we look at it scientifically, but it's interesting anyway to think of how the Romans thought of health and cleanliness. Here's another view. This is of that same bath in London. I thought this was a really pretty picture because the other one was a morning picture you could see from the steam coming up off it. This is a beautiful image of the pool. And you can imagine what this would have looked like. So Romans definitely came to the baths in order to relax, to see other Romans, to do business. You would go for political purposes. There was a lot of different reasons Romans would go to the baths, and it was almost entirely for social reasons. This was something Romans did to relax. Remember, they didn't have TV. They would go to the races. They would go to gladiatorial events if they were going on at that time, and they would go to the baths. And this was what all upward-thinking Romans did. So, I hope you enjoyed Roman toilet time. Unfortunately, a lot of the fun theatrics that we take part in when we get to do this in class, we aren't able to do, but I'm glad that we can at least share pieces of this. And when next we see each other, I will make sure that we speak again about it, and we will have the festivities that we avoided here with our home isolation. This is our day 5 quarantine video, and I want to say again how much I really miss you. As we've sat here at home this week, these last couple of days for me, I was in school, of course, the first two. It's been difficult because I think the reality of our situation is starting to settle in. The realization that it's going to be a little while probably before we get to see each other again. And that disappoints me a lot because there were so many wonderful things that I just couldn't wait to see your reaction on some of the things that we talk about. So let's stay positive though, and I hope that you continue to tune in for my daily quarantine check-ins. I've gotten some great emails from folks. You can, of course, email me at my school email address. That is Pestabrook, as so many of you enjoy, PESTABROOK at msad54.org. Hope I hear from as many of you as I can. Get this out and share it. Subscribe, hit the little bell, give a like, do all that YouTube-y stuff, and I will try to keep these going to you and connect to as many people as I can. So, again, miss you all greatly. Have a wonderful, wonderful day and a wonderful weekend. I will see you soon.